The first time my son told a doctor I was forgetting things, he said it with his hand wrapped gently around mine like devotion and betrayal could wear the same face. I sat there in that cold Savannah office, listening to Michael list my supposed confusion, my misplaced papers, my fading memory. But while he was busy trying to erase me, one detail stayed sharp as broken glass in my mind. I remembered the document he thought I hadn't read. I remembered the line he wasn't supposed to touch. And more than anything, I remembered exactly where my son signed his name. If this opening already stirred something in you, please like and subscribe. And while you listen, tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone smile in your face while quietly trying to take your power? I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there tonight. My name is Lorraine Hayes, and until a few months ago, I would have told you with complete confidence that I knew exactly who I was, where everything in my life belonged, and who I could trust. I am 67 years old, a widow of 11 years, and I spent more than 3 decades working as a bookkeeper for a small construction company here in Savannah, Georgia. Numbers were my language. Order was my comfort. Every receipt, every invoice, every signature had its place, and if something didn't add up, I knew it before anyone else even looked twice. That part of me didn't disappear when I retired. If anything, it grew stronger. My home sits on a quiet street lined with old oak trees, their branches stretching across the road like they're holding hands above you. It's the same house my husband Richard and I bought 40 years ago. We raised our son here. We buried our arguments in this kitchen and celebrated our small victories in the living room that still smells faintly of lemon polish and old books. After Richard passed, the house became quieter, but not empty. I learned how to live in that silence. I made routines for myself. Morning coffee at the same time. Bills paid on the first Monday of each month. Important documents kept in labeled folders locked neatly inside my desk drawer. I didn't just remember things. I built my life so I didn't have to guess. And for a long time it worked. Michael used to fit into that life without disrupting it. He was always the kind of man people warmed to quickly. Charming, quick with a smile. The sort who could walk into a room and leave with 3 new friends and someone offering him a job. As a boy, he had that same energy. He asked questions constantly, always wanted to understand how things worked. Richard used to say, "That boy's going to go further than either of us ever did." For a while, it looked like he might. He moved to Atlanta in his 30s, started a small business, got married. I remember standing in this very hallway, helping him straighten his tie on his wedding day, thinking I had done something right. But life doesn't always move in straight lines. The business didn't last. The marriage didn't either. And about 8 months ago, Michael came back. He stood on my front porch with 2 suitcases and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He said it was temporary, just until he got back on his feet, just until he found his next opportunity. "I'll help you around the house," he told me. "It'll be good for both of us." I believed him. At first, it did feel that way. He fixed the loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet that Richard had always meant to get to. He mowed the lawn without me asking. He insisted on driving me to the grocery store, carrying the bags in like I was made of something fragile. And I won't lie, I was grateful. Loneliness can make even small gestures feel like blessings. But something shifted so gradually, I almost missed it. It started with my mail. I came in one afternoon to find a stack of envelopes already opened on the kitchen counter. Michael stood there flipping through them like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I was just sorting things for you," he said, not even looking up. I remember standing there for a second too long, trying to decide if I was being unreasonable. He was helping after all. That's what I told myself. So I let it go. Then it was my desk. I have always kept my paperwork in order, labeled folders, color-coded tabs, everything exactly where it belongs. One morning I opened the drawer and felt it before I even saw it. Something was off. The folders were slightly out of alignment, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me. When I asked Michael about it, he gave me that same easy smile. "I was just looking for a warranty paper you mentioned," he said. "You've got so many files in there, Mom. It's hard to keep track." Hard to keep track. The words lingered longer than they should have. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I simply straightened the folders back into place and closed the drawer. But I started paying closer attention. It was little things after that. When Denise Carter came by one afternoon, she's lived next door for nearly 20 years, a retired nurse with a sharper eye than most people realize, Michael answered the door before I could. "Hey, Denise," he said warmly. "Mom's been having one of her slower days, but she'll be happy to see you." Slower days. I heard it from the hallway standing just out of sight. When I stepped into the living room, Denise's expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. There was concern there. Careful, polite concern. We sat and talked like we always did, but something underneath it had changed. Later, after she left, I asked Michael what he meant by that. He shrugged like it was nothing. "I just don't want people expecting too much from you," he said. "You've been a little forgetful lately." I stared at him. I asked. He softened his voice instantly. "It's normal, Mom. It happens. You don't have to be embarrassed." That was the first moment something inside me tightened. Not snapped, not broken, just tightened. Because embarrassment wasn't what I felt. I felt watched. After that, I began noticing how often Michael spoke for me. If someone asked a question, he answered before I could. If I started telling a story, he gently corrected small details, dates, names, tiny things that didn't matter enough to argue over, but added up in ways I couldn't quite explain. It was subtle, careful, almost practiced. And the worst part? He never raised his voice. He never showed anger. He wrapped everything in patience and concern, in the kind of tone that makes everyone else think he's the reasonable one, which leaves you looking like the problem if you push back. One evening as we sat at the dinner table, he mentioned updating some of my paperwork. "Just to make things easier," he said, "in case anything ever happens." I remember nodding more out of habit than agreement. I had always handled my own affairs, my will, my accounts. Everything was already organized. But he spoke as if it wasn't enough. As if I wasn't enough. "I've got a friend who can help," he added. "It's simple stuff. We can go over it together." There was something in his tone that night, something just slightly too eager. I didn't question it then, not out loud. But that same tight feeling returned sharper this time, because for the first time I realized something I couldn't ignore anymore. Michael wasn't just helping me. He was positioning himself inside my life in ways I hadn't invited, and piece by piece, quietly and carefully, he was changing how other people saw me. At the time, I didn't yet know how far he was willing to take it. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing in my life had ever just happened by accident. And whatever was happening now was not accidental either. If you had asked me even then whether I believed my own son was deliberately trying to make me look incapable, I would have hesitated. Not because I didn't see the signs, but because there are some conclusions a mother resists not out of ignorance, but out of instinct. You don't want to name something that ugly when it wears your child's face. So instead, I told myself I was being overly sensitive. Until the morning I couldn't find my bank folder. Now that might not sound like much to anyone else. People misplace things every day. but I had kept that folder in the same place for years, inside the bottom drawer of my desk, tucked beneath a blue tab labeled Monthly Statements. It wasn't just habit. It was routine built over decades. My hands could have found it in the dark. And yet that morning, it was gone. I didn't panic right away. I checked the drawer again, slower this time, moving each folder carefully. Then I checked the top drawer, then the shelf beside the desk, then the dining table, even though I knew I hadn't taken it there. By the time I reached the kitchen, something inside me had shifted from confusion to something colder. "Michael," I called. He appeared a moment later, phone in hand, his expression already tilted with concern before I'd said a word. "What's wrong, Mom?" "My bank folder," I said. "The blue one." "It's not where I left it." He frowned, stepping closer. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. "You've been moving things around lately." There it was again, that careful phrasing. I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm sure," I said. He nodded slowly, as if humoring me. "Let's take a look," he said. We searched together, or at least that's what it looked like. He moved through the house casually, opening cabinets I wouldn't have thought to check, glancing into places that didn't make sense. And then, after less than 2 minutes, he let out a small, relieved laugh. "Found it." I turned. He was standing by the pantry, holding the blue folder like it had been there all along, tucked between a box of cereal and a stack of canned soup. For a second, I just stared at it. Then I walked over slowly and took it from his hands. "This was in the kitchen?" I asked. He smiled, soft and patient. "Looks like it," he said. "You probably set it down while you were putting groceries away." I didn't respond, because I knew something he didn't expect me to know. I had not taken that folder out of my desk, not the day before, not the week before, not at all. Still, I forced a small nod, the kind that ends a conversation without agreeing to it. "Well," I said quietly, "thank you for finding it." He gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "No problem, Mom. That's what I'm here for. That's what I'm here for." The words echoed long after he walked away. Later that afternoon, Denise stopped by. She didn't call first, she rarely does. Just knocked twice and let herself in like she always has. There's a comfort in that kind of familiarity, a history that doesn't need to be announced. We sat in the living room with our usual cups of tea, the sunlight falling through the curtains just the way it always had. For a few minutes, everything felt normal, until she set her cup down and looked at me a little too carefully. "Lorraine," she said, her voice gentle. "How have you been feeling lately?" I smiled. "Same as always," I said. "Why do you ask?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation I felt something inside me brace itself. "Well," she said slowly, "Michael mentioned you've been having a few memory slips." There it was. Not imagined. Not accidental. He had said it to someone else. I kept my expression calm, though my fingers tightened slightly around the handle of my cup. "Did he?" I asked. Denise nodded. "He just seemed concerned," she added quickly. "Said you'd been misplacing things, repeating yourself a bit. I just wanted to check in." I let out a soft breath, the kind meant to reassure. "I misplaced a folder this morning," I said. "That's all." Denise studied me for a moment longer than necessary. "You don't seem like someone who loses track of things," she said carefully. A faint smile touched my lips. "I'm not," I replied. She didn't push further, but something passed between us, then something unspoken but understood. Denise has always been observant. Years of nursing will do that to a person. She knows the difference between what people say and what they mean, and I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced by Michael's version of things. After she left, I found myself standing alone in the kitchen staring at the pantry door. I opened it slowly, scanning the shelves. Cereal boxes, canned goods, everything in its place. Except for one thing. There was no space where that folder could have sat unnoticed, not without being moved. Deliberately, I closed the door and leaned back against it, my heart beating just a little faster than it should have. This wasn't about forgetfulness. This was about placement, control, narrative. Over the next few days, I started noticing more. Small things easy to dismiss if you weren't paying attention. My pill organizer shifted just slightly to the left of where I always kept it. A set of keys appearing on the hallway table when I distinctly remembered leaving them in my purse. Michael correcting me in front of the television when I mentioned a date. "No, Mom," he said lightly. "That was last week, not yesterday." He said it with a smile like it didn't matter. But it did. Because each time it planted a seed. Not just in my mind, in anyone who might be listening. The pattern became impossible to ignore. And yet, he never crossed a line that could be clearly called out. No yelling, no accusations, just gentle redirection, careful adjustments, a steady, quiet reshaping of reality. And the more I watched, the more I understood something that chilled me deeper than any argument ever could. Michael wasn't trying to convince me I was forgetting things. He was trying to convince everyone else. Which meant one thing. He didn't need me to believe it. He just needed enough people around me to start questioning, including doctors, including neighbors, including anyone who might one day be asked to decide whether I was still capable of managing my own life. I stood there in my kitchen, the late afternoon light stretching long shadows across the floor, and felt that tightness in my chest return stronger now, sharper, undeniable. Because this was no longer about misplaced folders or harmless mistakes. This was a story being written, and I was not the one holding the pen. At least, not yet. The next time Michael brought up the idea of seeing a specialist, he didn't frame it as a suggestion. He framed it as something that was already decided. "I made an appointment," he said one morning, standing in the kitchen with his coffee in hand, speaking casually as if he were reminding me about the weather. "Just a memory check. Nothing serious." I looked up from the table where I had been balancing my checkbook. "You made it?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "I didn't want to wait too long. It's better to catch these things early." "These things." The words settled between us like dust no one wanted to acknowledge. "I didn't ask for an appointment," I said quietly. Michael set his mug down and leaned against the counter, softening his expression. "I know," he replied gently, "but you don't always notice when something's off, Mom. That's kind of the point." There it was again. Not confrontation. Correction. I held his gaze for a moment, then looked back down at my ledger, closing it carefully. "What time?" I asked. 2:00, he said. "Dr. Stephen Keller. He's good." Of course he was. Everything about this was already arranged. The clinic sat in a quiet medical complex just outside downtown Savannah, the kind of place that looked calm on the surface, but carried the weight of too many quiet diagnoses behind its doors. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic, and something floral meant to soften it. A television played low-volume daytime news. A few other patients sat scattered across the chairs, each one lost in their own thoughts. Michael checked us in. He filled out forms before I even had a chance to reach for the clipboard. "Just trying to make it easier," he said when I noticed. I didn't respond. Instead, I watched. I watched what boxes he checked. I watched how long he paused over certain questions. I watched the way he wrote quick, confident, controlled. That same hand. The same one I had seen weeks ago hovering over a line it didn't belong on. Lorraine Hayes, a nurse called. Michael stood immediately. "We're here," he said. "We." I rose slowly, smoothing my blouse, and followed them down the hallway. Dr. Keller's office was bright with framed degrees lining one wall and a bookshelf filled with medical texts that looked more decorative than used. He was younger than I expected. Mid-40s maybe. Clean cut. Polite? He smiled as we entered. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, extending a hand. "Nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you," I replied, shaking it. "And you must be Michael," he added. "Yes, sir," Michael said easily. We sat. Dr. Keller glanced at the chart in front of him, then looked up at me. "So what brings you in today?" Before I could answer, Michael spoke. "I've been noticing some changes," he said. "Mom's been forgetting things more often. Misplacing important papers, repeating stories, getting a little confused about dates." His tone was calm, measured, concerned. I turned my head slowly and looked at him. He didn't meet my eyes. Instead, he kept his attention on the doctor as if I were the subject of discussion rather than part of it. "I misplaced one folder," I said, my voice steady. "That's not the same thing." Dr. Keller nodded, jotting something down. "Have you noticed any changes yourself, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked. I met his gaze. "No," I said simply. Michael let out a small, almost sympathetic breath. "She wouldn't," he said softly. "That's what makes this tricky." Something in my chest tightened, but I didn't react outwardly. Dr. Keller continued asking questions, some directed at me, some at Michael. Simple things at first. "What day is it? Where are we right now? Can you recall 3 words after a short delay?" I answered each one without hesitation, correctly. But every time I spoke, Michael added something. "She had trouble with that last week. She forgot my friend's name the other day. She told the same story twice at dinner. Each comment was small, harmless on its own. But together they built something. A pattern, a suggestion, a quiet narrative forming right there in the room. I could see it in the doctor's posture, in the way his pen moved across the page. He wasn't ignoring my answers, but he wasn't relying on them either. Not entirely. "Have there been any recent stressors?" Dr. Keller asked. "Her husband passed a while ago," Michael said, "and she lives alone. I moved back in recently to help out." "Help out!" I folded my hands in my lap, keeping them still. "I manage my own affairs," I said. "Of course," Michael replied quickly, "and you've done an amazing job. We just want to make sure everything stays that way. Again." Dr. Keller nodded thoughtfully. "It's not uncommon for family members to notice changes before the individual does," he said. "Especially in early stages." Early stages. The phrase landed heavier than the others. "I'm not in any stage," I said a little more firmly this time. There was a brief pause. Then Michael reached over and placed his hand gently on mine. "It's okay, Mom," he said softly. "We're just being careful." Careful. That word again. Wrapped in kindness. Sharp underneath. Dr. Keller leaned back slightly. "I think it would be wise to do a more comprehensive evaluation," he said. "Just to be sure. Nothing we've discussed today is definitive, but it's worth exploring further." Michael nodded immediately. "I agree," he said. Of course he did. I sat there feeling the room shift in a way that had nothing to do with me answering questions incorrectly, and everything to do with the story being told around me. A story I hadn't written, but one that was beginning to take shape in someone else's handwriting. The drive home was quiet at first. Michael kept his eyes on the road, one hand resting lightly on the steering wheel. "You did great in there," he said after a few minutes. I turned my head and looked out the window. I answered every question correctly, I said. "I know," he replied. "That's good." There was a pause. Then he added, almost casually, "It's just the little things we're keeping an eye on. The little things. Always the little things." He reached over, then briefly touching my arm. "I'm just trying to protect you," he said. I looked down at his hand, then back at the road ahead. For a moment, I saw two versions of my son. The boy who used to sit at my kitchen table doing homework, asking me to check his math, and the man sitting beside me now, carefully constructing something I hadn't agreed to. "I don't need protection," I said quietly. Michael smiled. "Everyone does eventually," he replied. That night I lay awake longer than usual. The house was still. The same walls. The same rooms. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt altered, not in the physical sense, but in the way it was being perceived, defined, framed. I stared at the ceiling, letting the silence settle around me, and tried to follow the thread of everything that had happened. The misplaced folder, the comments to Denise, the way Michael spoke in the doctor's office, the forms he filled out without asking, the appointment he made without telling me. And then, the dining room. 3 weeks earlier, the papers, the way he had pushed them toward me, the way he had rushed me, the way his hand had moved quick, almost careless across a line that didn't belong to him. My breath slowed, my thoughts sharpened, because for the first time since all of this began, something became unmistakably clear. This wasn't about concern, it wasn't about memory, and it certainly wasn't about protecting me. This was about positioning, control, preparation. And whatever Michael was planning, he had already started putting it into motion. But he had made one mistake, one small, precise, undeniable mistake. He thought I wasn't paying attention. He thought I wouldn't remember. But I did. I remembered the paper. I remembered the moment. And most importantly, I remembered exactly where he signed his name. Memory is a strange thing. People assume it fades all at once like a light going out in a room. But that isn't how it works. Even the weakest memory has edges, shapes, textures, fragments that stay long after the center blurs. And sometimes the smallest detail becomes the one thing that refuses to disappear. For me, it was that afternoon in the dining room, 3 weeks before the doctor's office. 3 weeks before Michael began saying the word forgetful out loud. I remember the light first. It came in through the side window, soft and angled, catching the edge of the table where Richard used to sit. I had just finished sorting the week's mail and was stacking envelopes into neat piles when Michael walked in carrying a manila folder. He didn't hesitate. "Hey, Mom," he said casually, setting it down in front of me. "I've got something we should go over." I looked at the folder, then at him. "What is it?" "Just some paperwork," he replied. "Nothing complicated. It's just to make things easier in case anything ever happens." There it was again. That phrase, "in case anything ever happens." I had heard it before, usually from people who wanted to make decisions before they had the right to. "I already have everything in order," I said, resting my hand on the edge of the folder without opening it. "My will, my accounts, everything's been handled," I know he said quickly. "And you did a great job with that. This is just an update, a backup plan. My friend helped put it together." "What friend? A guy I know. Works with legal stuff," Michael said, waving it off like the details didn't matter. "It's standard." Standard. I opened the folder. Inside were several pages clipped neatly together. The formatting was clean, professional enough to pass at a glance. But I don't read at a glance. I read the way I've always read, line by line. My eyes moved slowly across the first page. Medical authorization language, consent forms, broad, vague wording about allowing assistance if needed. Nothing alarming yet. But I didn't stop there. I turned the page, then another. That's when I felt it. Not fear, not even suspicion. Recognition. Because beneath the surface of those pages, beneath the polite wording and structured layout, there were inconsistencies, small ones, subtle ones, the kind most people would overlook, but I don't overlook. I notice a clause that was too open-ended, a section that referenced authority without clearly defining its limits, a signature block that seemed misplaced. I adjusted my glasses, leaning in slightly. "What exactly is this supposed to do?" I asked. Michael shifted in his chair. "It just lets me step in if you ever need help," he said. "Pay bills, handle things, make decisions if you're not able to." I looked up at him. "I am able," I said. "Of course you are," he replied quickly. "This is just for later. You know, just in case." There it was again. Always later. Always hypothetical. Always positioned as harmless. I turned back to the pages. There was one in particular that made me pause. It wasn't labeled clearly at the top like the others. It sat between two medical forms, but the language didn't match. It mentioned property decisions, broad authority tied to a determination of incapacity, and the wording was vague enough that incapacity could be interpreted more loosely than I liked. "Why is this in here?" I asked, tapping the page lightly. Michael leaned forward, glancing at it quickly. "That's part of the same thing he said. It all works together. It doesn't read like the same thing," I replied. His smile tightened just slightly. "You're overthinking it," he said. "It's standard language. Everyone does this. Everyone." Another word meant to close a conversation. I didn't argue. Not directly. Instead, I set the papers down gently. "I'd like to have Patricia look at these," I said. The change in his posture was immediate. Not dramatic, but noticeable. "We don't need to involve a lawyer," he said. "It's really simple. If it's simple," I replied calmly, "then she'll confirm that." He exhaled softly, running a hand through his hair. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice, "you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. And you're asking me to sign something I didn't request," I said. We held each other's gaze for a moment. There was no anger in his eyes, just calculation. Then just as quickly it softened again. "Okay," he said. "We don't have to do it right now. We can come back to it." He reached for the papers. That's when it happened. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a small, almost careless movement. As he gathered the stack, one page shifted slightly out of alignment, and instead of correcting it, Michael did something else. He picked up a pen, a blue one, the kind he always carries. He glanced at the page, hesitated for half a second, then signed his name. Not at the bottom, not in a designated signature block meant for him, but on a line slightly above it. A line that suggested acknowledgement or involvement beyond what he had just described. It was quick, fluid, as if he didn't think twice about it. As if he assumed I wasn't paying attention, but I was. Every part of me was. I didn't react, didn't lean forward, didn't question him. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pretended. I removed my glasses, slowly setting them on the table. "Well," I said with a small sigh, "maybe I am overthinking it." Relief flickered across his face. "We can go over it again later," he said, stacking the papers neatly. "Later," I repeated. He tucked the folder back under his arm, and just like that, the moment passed. Or at least it looked like it did. But inside me, something had already locked into place. Because that wasn't just a signature. It was a mistake. A small one. A precise one. But a mistake all the same. The kind that doesn't belong in something standard. The kind that reveals intention if you know where to look. That night, after Michael went to bed, I sat alone in the dining room. The same light had faded, replaced by the soft glow of the lamp in the corner. I replayed the moment again and again in my mind. The angle of his hand, the pressure of the pen, the exact line where his name appeared. Not where it should have been, but where it shouldn't. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Michael hadn't just brought me paperwork. He had brought me a structure, a framework. Something designed to give him access step by step, piece by piece, under the right conditions. Conditions that conveniently he was now starting to describe to others. Forgetfulness, confusion, decline. I leaned back in my chair, my heart steady, my thoughts sharper than they had been all week, because for the first time I wasn't reacting anymore. I was understanding. And once you understand something like that, you don't unsee it. You don't dismiss it. You don't explain it away. You prepare. Because whatever Michael was building, it didn't start in that doctor's office. It started right here, at this table, with those papers, and with one signature he never should have made, but did, right in front of me. Thinking I wouldn't remember, thinking I wouldn't notice, thinking I wouldn't matter. He was wrong. Once you see a pattern clearly, it becomes impossible to go back to the comfort of uncertainty. That night, after sitting alone in the dining room, I made a decision. I would stop reacting, and I would start paying attention with intention. The difference may sound small, but it changes everything. Reacting keeps you one step behind. Observing puts you exactly where you need to be, quiet, steady, and unseen. The next morning, I followed my routine as if nothing had changed. Coffee at 7. News at 8. Bills laid out on the table just after 9. Michael moved through the house like he always did, casual, confident, comfortable, in a space that had once belonged entirely to me. He greeted me with the same soft tone, the same careful smile. "Morning, Mom," he said. "Good morning," I replied. Nothing in my voice betrayed what I now understood, but everything in my mind had shifted. The first place I went once Michael stepped out to run an errand was my desk. I unlocked the bottom drawer, slowly pulling it open just enough to see inside before touching anything. At a glance, everything looked as it should, but I didn't trust glances anymore. I reached in and began removing each folder one at a time, placing them on the desk in neat rows. Blue tabs, green tabs, yellow tabs. Each labeled in my handwriting, each positioned exactly where I had trained myself to keep them. Until I reached the property section, the folder labeled Home and Deed Records. I paused, then opened it. The first page was there, my original deed copy dated correctly, notarized properly. Behind it, the property tax records, insurance documents. But something was missing. Not obviously missing. Not enough for someone unfamiliar to notice, but enough for me. There should have been a secondary document, a copy of a prior consultation draft I had discussed with Patricia 2 years ago regarding contingency ownership transfer, something we never finalized. It wasn't there. I closed the folder slowly, my fingers resting on the edge. That document had no reason to be removed. None. Unless someone wanted to reference it, or use it, or replace it. I slid the folders back into place, locking the drawer carefully. My hands were steady, but my thoughts were moving faster now. The next step required something I hadn't planned to do so soon. I needed Patricia. I picked up the phone and dialed her office number from memory. She answered on the third ring. "Whitmore, legal," her assistant said. "This is Lorraine Hayes," I said. "I'd like to speak with Patricia." "One moment, please." There was a brief pause, then Patricia's voice came on the line, calm, measured, familiar. "Lorraine," she said. "It's been a while. How are you?" "I'm well," I replied, "but I need to ask you something directly." There was a subtle shift in her tone. "Of course. Has anyone contacted you recently regarding my accounts or legal documents?" I asked. A brief silence followed. "Not long, but long enough." "Yes," Patricia said carefully. "Your son Michael reached out last week." My grip on the phone tightened slightly, and what did he say? "He expressed concern about your ability to manage certain responsibilities," she replied. "He asked about updating your power of attorney and reviewing your estate documents." I closed my eyes for a moment. "I didn't authorize that," I said. "I assumed as much," Patricia replied, "which is why I didn't proceed with anything. I told him I would need to speak with you directly." Relief moved through me, but it was brief, quickly replaced by something heavier. "He's also taken paperwork from my home," I said. "Documents that shouldn't be missing." Patricia didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was firmer. "Lorraine," she said, "I think you should come in and see me." "Alone." "I agree," I replied. We set a time for the following day. As I hung up the phone, I stood there for a moment staring at nothing in particular. It was one thing to suspect, another to confirm. Michael hadn't just been talking. He had already begun acting. That afternoon, something happened that pushed everything further than I expected. I had gone out briefly to pick up a few groceries, nothing unusual. Milk, bread, a few things Denise had mentioned she needed. When I returned, Michael's car was parked in the driveway. I carried the bags up to the passenger side door, intending to take them in through the kitchen. And then I saw it. The envelope. It sat on the front seat, partially tucked beneath a folded jacket, plain, unmarked, but not sealed. I hesitated, not because I didn't know what I was doing, but because I did. I opened the door slowly and reached in, lifting the envelope just enough to look inside. There were several documents, and on top of them, a brochure. Assisted living options in coastal Georgia. My breath caught. I pulled it out carefully, flipping it open. Images of clean rooms, smiling residents, soft lighting meant to feel comforting. Below it, a business card slid free. Elliott and Barnes, probate and guardianship law. Guardianship. The word sat heavier than anything else I had seen so far. Because guardianship isn't just about helping. It's about control. Legal control. The kind that allows someone to make decisions on your behalf, financial, medical, personal, once you've been declared incapable. I placed everything back exactly as I found it, closing the car door quietly. For a moment, I stood there in the driveway, the grocery bags hanging from my hands, the late afternoon sun warm against my face, and I understood something with absolute clarity. Michael wasn't preparing for a possibility. He was building a case that would require concern from others, documentation, professional opinions, and most importantly, a narrative. A story where I was no longer reliable, no longer capable, no longer in control. I walked inside slowly, setting the groceries on the counter. Michael appeared from the hallway. "Oh, you're back," he said. "Need help with those?" "No," I replied calmly. "I've got it." He studied me for a moment as if measuring something. "You doing okay?" he asked. "I'm fine. I said. He nodded, but his eyes lingered just a second too long. Searching, watching, waiting. I turned away, putting things in their proper places, milk in the refrigerator, bread in the cabinet, each item exactly where it belonged. Order, routine, control. The very things he was quietly trying to take from me. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after Michael had gone to bed. The house was silent again, but it didn't feel the same. Not anymore. Because now I wasn't just living in it. I was watching it, tracking it, understanding it, and every piece I uncovered led to the same conclusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't concern, and it wasn't temporary. This was a plan, carefully built, step by step, and if I didn't move just as carefully, I wouldn't just lose control of my paperwork or my finances. I would lose control of my life. But Michael had underestimated one thing. He thought I would panic, that I would confront him too soon, that I would react. Instead, I was going to let him continue, let him believe his story was working, let him go just far enough that when the truth came out, there would be no way for him to take it back. The next morning, I dressed with more care than usual. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I needed to feel like myself. There is something grounding about small rituals when everything else begins to feel uncertain. The way you button your blouse, the way you smooth your hair, the way you choose your shoes. It reminds you that you still have control over something, even if it's just how you present yourself to the world. By the time I stepped out of the house, Michael had already left. He said he had a few things to take care of, which suited me just fine. I drove myself to Patricia Whitmore's office. Alone. Her office sat in a quiet brick building just off the historic district, the kind of place that didn't advertise itself loudly, but had been there long enough to be trusted without question. I had been walking through those doors for years, first with Richard, then on my own after he passed. Patricia had handled our will, our property matters, everything that required precision and foresight. If there was one person in this city who understood the importance of details, it was her. Lorraine, she said as I entered, rising from behind her desk. Come in. Her tone was warm, but her eyes were sharp, observing, assessing. I sat across from her, placing my handbag carefully beside the chair. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she folded her hands on the desk. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. I told her about the misplaced folder, about the comments to Denise, about the doctor's visit, about the paperwork Michael had brought to the dining table, and finally, about the signature. I described it exactly as I remembered every detail, every movement, every line. Patricia didn't interrupt once. She simply listened. When I finished, she leaned back slightly, her expression thoughtful. Lorraine, she said slowly, what you're describing is concerning. I gave a small, humorless smile. That's one word for it. She reached into a folder on her desk and pulled out a set of documents. I want you to look at something, she said. She turned the pages toward me. My breath caught. Even before I fully processed what I was seeing, I recognized the formatting, the structure, the language. It was similar to what Michael had shown me, but this was worse, because this was a copy that had already been submitted. At the top in clean professional print was a heading referencing preliminary review of updated authority documents. My name was there, typed neatly, and below it, a signature. Mine. Or at least, something that looked like it. I stared at it, my mind briefly stalling. That's not... I began, then stopped. Because for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, something unfamiliar crept in. Doubt. Not loud, not overwhelming, just enough to make me hesitate. Had I signed something without fully reading it? Had I been distracted? Had I missed something? Patricia watched me carefully. "Take your time," she said. I leaned forward, my eyes narrowing as I studied the page more closely, and then I saw it. Not my signature, not the wording, not the formatting. Him, Michael. There on the second page, slightly offset from the proper line, was his name, signed in blue ink, on a line that didn't belong to him, exactly where I remembered it. The room seemed to steady around me. The doubt disappeared as quickly as it had come. "No," I said firmly. "I didn't sign this." Patricia nodded, her expression sharpening. "I didn't think you did," she said. I looked up at her. "He brought those papers to my house," I said. "I refused to sign. But he signed one page himself. Wrong line, wrong placement. I saw it." Patricia tapped the page lightly. "And now that same signature appears on a document submitted for review," she said. "That's not a coincidence." "No," I agreed. "It isn't." She closed the folder slowly. "Michael hasn't completed any formal legal change," she continued. "What he submitted is preliminary, more like an inquiry, but it establishes intent. Intent to do what I asked, though I already knew the answer. To position himself for authority," she said. "Power of attorney, possibly guardianship depending on how far he intends to go." The word landed heavily. Guardianship. I thought of the brochure in his car, the assisted living facility, the careful comments to neighbors, the doctor's office. All of it connected now. "He's building a case," I said quietly. "Yes," Patricia replied. "And cases like that rely on perception as much as documentation." I let that settle, because that was exactly what I had been feeling. Perception, not truth. A version of reality shaped carefully, presented, slowly repeated, often enough to be believed. "What can we do?" I asked. Patricia leaned forward. "We proceed carefully," she said. "If we confront him directly right now, he may deny everything. Adjust his approach or escalate. Escalate? How? By pushing harder for medical evaluations," she said. "By involving other parties. By trying to move faster before you can respond." I nodded slowly. That sounded exactly like Michael. "So we let him continue?" I asked. "To a point," she said. "We observe. We document. We protect you quietly." She reached for a notepad and began writing. "I'm going to put a hold on any requests made in your name, unless they come directly from you in person," she said. "No exceptions." "Good," I replied. "I also want you to keep track of everything," she continued. "Dates, conversations. Anything unusual?" "I can do that." "I know you can," she said. There was a brief pause. Then she looked at me more closely. "Lorraine," she said, her tone softer now. "This is not just about paperwork." "I know," I said. "This is about your autonomy," she continued. "Your right to make your own decisions. If someone successfully convinces others that you're no longer capable." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "I won't let that happen," I said. Patricia studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you," she said. When I left her office, the air outside felt different. Not lighter, not easier, but clearer. There's a strange kind of calm that comes when fear is replaced with certainty, because uncertainty leaves you guessing. Certainty gives you direction. And I knew exactly what I was dealing with now. Not confusion, Not misunderstanding, but a deliberate effort, a plan, carefully constructed, quietly executed, and built on the assumption that I would either not notice or not remember. I walked to my car slowly, my thoughts steady. Michael had taken steps, but he hadn't finished, which meant he still felt safe, still believed he was in control. And that belief, that confidence, would be the very thing that exposed him. Because people are most careless when they think they're winning. As I started the engine, I allowed myself one small, quiet thought. Not anger, not revenge, just clarity. He thought he was rewriting my story, but he forgot something important. I had spent my entire life reading between the lines, and once you learn how to do that, you never stop. There is a particular kind of pain that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't shout or break things or demand attention. It sits quietly inside you and asks something far more difficult. It asks you to pretend. Patricia's advice stayed with me all the way home. Don't confront him yet. Don't reveal what you know. Let him believe his version of events is working. I understood why, but understanding something doesn't make it easy, because pretending to be confused, when you are anything but, feels like surrender even when it isn't. Still, I had spent enough years balancing accounts to know one truth. Sometimes the only way to expose a false entry is to let it remain visible long enough for the pattern to reveal itself. So I made my choice. I would play along. Just enough. That evening, Michael was in the living room when I came in. He looked up from his phone, studying me in that quiet, assessing way I had come to recognize. "How was your day?" he asked. "Good," I said, setting my purse down. I paused for just a second, then added lightly, "I stopped by the grocery store. Or was that yesterday?" The moment the words left my mouth, I felt something twist inside me because I knew exactly when I had gone. But I let the question hang there anyway. Michael didn't answer right away. Instead, his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "It was today," he said gently. "You went this afternoon?" I nodded slowly. "Right," I murmured. "That's what I thought." He watched me for a moment longer, then smiled. "It's okay, Mom," he said. "Little things like that happen. Little things." There it was again. I forced a faint smile in return. Of course, I said. Inside, something hardened, because I saw it now. Not just the words, the reaction, the way his posture relaxed slightly as if something had just been confirmed, as if I had just proven something to him. The next morning, I took it a step further. Denise came by again this time with a small container of soup, something she often did when she had extra. We stood in the kitchen talking, the conversation easy at first. "How are you feeling?" she asked casually. "Fine," I said. Then I paused, looked toward the window, and said, "Did you come by yesterday too? Or am I mixing that up?" Denise's eyes flickered quick, sharp. "No, honey," she said slowly. "I was here a few days ago." "Oh," I replied softly. "Right. That's what I meant." I kept my tone light, natural. But Denise didn't respond right away. She was watching me now. Really watching me. Not with concern, with attention. And that was exactly what I needed. Because Denise didn't just hear words. She listened for what didn't make sense. Over the next few days, I continued. Small things. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that could be clearly defined as a problem. Just enough to feed the narrative Michael had been building. I asked him to repeat a date I already knew. I hesitated over the name of a neighbor I had known for years. I let him correct me in front of others. Each time he responded the same way, gentle, patient, reassuring, and each time I saw it, that subtle shift, that quiet satisfaction, like a man watching a plan unfold exactly as expected. But while Michael believed he was guiding the story, I was documenting it. Denise helped with that. We didn't make it obvious. We didn't sit down with notebooks in the middle of the room. Instead, we built something quieter, more precise. She started keeping a small journal. Dates, times, comments Michael made, situations where he spoke for me, corrected me, or introduced the idea that I was forgetting things. We kept it simple, factual, no emotion, just record. Because emotion can be dismissed. Facts cannot. Patricia, meanwhile, was moving just as carefully on her end. She had already placed restrictions on any legal actions in my name, but she also made something very clear to me. "Lorraine," she said during a brief call, "he's not going to stop." "I know," I replied. "He's invested now," she continued, "which means he's likely to escalate." That word again. Escalate. And when he does, she added, that's when he'll make a mistake. I thought of the signature, the wrong line, the one detail he hadn't been careful about. "Yes," I said quietly. "He already has." The moment it happened came sooner than I expected. It was a Thursday afternoon. Michael walked in carrying another folder. Not the same one. This one was thinner, cleaner, more controlled. "Hey, Mom," he said, setting it on the table. "We need to go over a couple of things." I looked at the folder, then at him. "What is it?" I asked. "Just some medical consent forms," he replied. "Routine stuff. The doctor's office suggested it after your visit." The doctor's office. Of course. He was tying it back to that now, building continuity, legitimacy. I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. He pulled out the papers, spreading them neatly across the table. At first glance, they looked exactly like what he claimed. Standard forms, authorization language, nothing unusual, but I didn't trust first glances anymore. I picked up the top page, reading carefully, then the next, and that's when I saw it. Not on the first page, not on the second, but beneath them. A fourth sheet, slightly offset, partially hidden. I didn't react, didn't pause, didn't let my eyes linger too long. Instead, I shifted the top pages just enough to read what was underneath. And my chest tightened, because it wasn't medical. Not really. It referenced authority, decision-making, property, all tied to a determination of diminished capacity, subtle, carefully worded, but unmistakable. He hadn't just brought me forms, he had layered them, hidden one purpose beneath another, and he thought I wouldn't notice. "Where do you want me to sign?" I asked quietly. Michael leaned forward immediately, relief flashing across his face before he could stop it. "Right here," he said, pointing to a line on the second page. I nodded slowly, then reached for my glasses, and deliberately fumbled. "Hold on," I said softly. "I can't quite see it." He shifted closer, leaning over the table. "It's right here," he said, tapping the paper again. I adjusted my glasses more slowly than necessary, let my hand hover just a moment too long, then asked, "This is the one about the doctor?" "Yes," he said quickly. "Just routine consent." Routine. I let out a small breath, then lowered my hand. "Maybe we should go over it again," I said. His jaw tightened just slightly. "Mom," he said, a hint of impatience slipping through. "We've already talked about this." I looked up at him. let a flicker of uncertainty show. I just want to be sure I said. For a moment, something in his expression changed. Not anger, not exactly, but pressure. Frustration barely contained beneath the surface. And then, a knock at the door. Sharp. Unexpected. Michael froze. Denise's voice followed a second later. "Lorraine!" "It's me, I brought something for you." The tension in the room shifted instantly. Michael straightened, stepping back from the table. "I'll get it," he said quickly. I nodded. As he walked away, I looked down at the papers. Then, without hesitation, I reached for my phone. One movement, one angle, one clear image of that hidden page. Captured. Sent. To Patricia. By the time Michael returned, I had set the phone back down, my hands folded neatly in front of me, my expression calm. Denise stepped inside, her eyes moving briefly from me to the table, then to Michael. "Hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "Not at all," Michael replied, his tone smooth again. "We were just finishing up." "Just finishing up?" I almost smiled, because for the first time since all of this began, I wasn't the one being guided anymore. He had just shown me exactly how far he was willing to go, and now I had proof. Once you have proof, everything changes. Not on the surface, not in the way you speak or move or breathe, but inside where fear used to live, something steadier takes its place. Clarity. That night after Michael went to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table with my phone in my hand, staring at the image I had taken. The hidden page. The one he thought I wouldn't see. Even in the dim light of the kitchen, I could make out every line clearly, the phrasing, the structure, the careful way it blended legal authority into what was supposed to be a medical document. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. Layered beneath something harmless so that if questioned, it could be explained away. But now it wasn't just something I remembered. It was something I could show. My phone buzzed softly in my hand. "Patricia." I answered immediately. I received the image, she said without preamble. Her voice was calm, but there was something sharper beneath it now. "You see it?" I asked. "Yes," she replied. "And Lorraine, this is significant." I exhaled slowly. "Tell me." "That document extends beyond medical consent," she said. "It creates a pathway, subtle but real, for expanded authority if you're deemed incapable. Combined with what he submitted earlier, it establishes a pattern of what I asked, though I already knew. Positioning himself for control," she said. The words settled into place with a quiet finality. "What do we do now?" I asked. "We continue," Patricia replied. "But now we're not just observing, we're building a case." There was a brief pause. "And Lorraine," she added, "do not sign anything, no matter how routine it seems." "I won't," I said. "I'll start preparing formal protections," she continued. "But timing will matter. We need him to commit to his version of events in a setting where it can't be easily walked back." In front of others, I said, "Yes." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I understand." When the call ended, I set the phone down gently on the table. For a long moment, I just sat there listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a car passing outside. Everything looked the same. But it wasn't. Because now this wasn't just something happening to me. It was something I was actively navigating. The next day, I behaved exactly as I had the day before. Routine, predictable, controlled. Michael watched me more closely now. I could feel it, the way his eyes lingered just a second longer when I spoke. The way he listened for hesitation, for confusion, for any sign that matched the story he had been telling. So I gave him just enough. "Did I take my pills this morning?" I asked casually, even though I knew I had. He looked up immediately. "You did," he said. "I saw you." "Oh," I replied. "Good." I let a small, embarrassed smile cross my face. Losing track of little things, I guess. He didn't respond right away, but I saw it. That subtle easing in his shoulders, that quiet confirmation, exactly what he needed. Later that afternoon, the pressure returned. Michael came into the kitchen carrying the same folder from the day before. "Hey," he said, "we didn't finish going over these." I looked up from the table. "Oh," I said. "Right." He placed the papers down again, smoother this time, more controlled. "Let's just take a few minutes," he added. "It's important." Important. I nodded slowly. "Okay." He slid the top page toward me. "Just sign where I marked," he said, tapping a small line with his finger. I picked up the pen, held it, then paused. "Which one is this again?" I asked. He leaned in, his patience thinner now. "It's the medical consent," he said. "We talked about it yesterday." I know, I said softly. "I just want to make sure." His jaw tightened. "Mom," he said, a slight edge in his voice, "you don't need to go over every single detail. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm here." The words hung in the air between us, heavy now, not comforting, claiming. I looked down at the page again, then slowly lowered the pen. "I think I'd feel better if Patricia looked at it," I said. The reaction was immediate, not explosive, but unmistakable. "We don't need a lawyer for this," he said quickly. "It's just a form." "I know," I replied calmly, "but I'd still like her to see it." He let out a short breath, stepping back from the table. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. Maybe I said, quietly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Denise's voice came from the doorway. "I hope I'm not interrupting again." Michael turned sharply. "No," he said too quickly. "You're fine." Denise stepped inside, her eyes taking in the scene, the papers, the tension, the distance between us. "I just wanted to drop off that recipe I mentioned," she said, holding up a small card. "Thank you," I replied. Michael gathered the papers, stacking them with more force than necessary. "We can do this later," he said. Of course I said. He didn't look at me as he left the room. Once he was gone, Denise moved closer to the table. She didn't speak right away. She simply looked at me. Really looked. "You're not forgetting things," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. I met her gaze. "No," I said. She nodded slowly. "I didn't think so." There was a brief pause. Then she added even softer, "He's pushing you." "Yes," I said. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway, then back to me. "What do you need?" she asked. I took a breath. "Witnesses," I said. "And patience." She smiled faintly. "You've got both," she replied. That evening, Michael barely spoke to me. He moved through the house with a tighter energy, now less relaxed, more controlled. He knew something wasn't going the way he expected, but he didn't know what. And that uncertainty was exactly where I needed him, because people reveal more when they're unsure, when their plan isn't unfolding as cleanly as they imagined. As I sat in the living room later that night, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the walls, I allowed myself a moment of stillness. Not fear, not anger, just awareness. because everything was in motion now. The doctor, the paperwork, the narrative he had built, and the evidence we were quietly gathering. It was all converging, and soon, very soon, Michael would have to commit fully to his version of events, in front of people who could no longer ignore the inconsistencies, in front of people who would have to decide, not based on his words, but on the truth. And when that moment came, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. I wouldn't need to argue. All I would have to do was remember. The truth, when it finally reveals itself, rarely arrives as a single dramatic moment. It comes in pieces, fragments that don't mean much on their own, until one day they align. And when they do, you realize the story was never complicated. It was just hidden. That alignment came for me 3 days after I sent Patricia the photo. She called early that morning, earlier than usual, her tone already carrying weight before she said a word. "Lorraine," she began. "I've been looking into Michael's financial background." I sat down at the kitchen table slowly. "What did you find?" I asked. A pause. Then, "He's in deeper trouble than he's told you." I closed my eyes briefly. How deep credit cards near their limits? At least one personal loan in default, and there's something else, a pending dispute with a former business partner. It hasn't gone to court yet, but it could. I let out a slow breath. "So he needs money," I said. "Yes," Patricia replied. "Not just eventually. Soon." That explained the urgency, the careful timing, the push for signatures, the quiet pressure wrapped in concern. When someone is under that kind of financial strain, she continued, they don't usually take small risks. They take calculated ones. Calculated. The word fit too well. Like trying to secure control over a property that's fully paid off, I said. "Exactly," she replied. "My house, mortgage-free, in a part of Savannah where property values had only gone up. To Michael, it wasn't just home. It was leverage." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, my hands resting flat against the table. For a moment, I let myself feel it fully. Not the anger. That would come later. Not the strategy. That was already in motion. But the part of it that hurt. Because this wasn't a stranger. This wasn't someone who had found an opportunity and taken it. This was my son, the boy I had raised, the man I had trusted to walk back into my life and treat it with care. And now I had to accept something I never imagined I would have to say out loud. He didn't just need help. He needed access. To me. To my life. To everything I had built. I stood slowly moving to the sink, letting the cold water run over my hands. For years, I had believed that no matter what happened in Michael's life, no matter how far he fell, he would never look at me as anything other than his mother. Not as an opportunity, not as a solution. But that belief was gone now. Later that afternoon, Michael came home earlier than expected. He walked into the kitchen, his movements just slightly sharper than usual. "Hey," he said. "Hello," I replied. He leaned against the counter watching me as I dried a plate. "We should probably revisit those forms," he said. "The doctor's office is going to need them." There it was again. The doctor. Always tied back to something official. Something that made his requests sound reasonable. "I'm still thinking about it," I said. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Mom, there's nothing to think about," he said. "It's routine." Routine. I set the plate down carefully. "I'd still like Patricia to review them," I said. The shift in his expression was immediate, subtle, but there. Why, he asked. "It's what I've always done," I replied. "For anything important." "This isn't that important," he said. "Then it won't matter if she looks at it," I said calmly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at me, not with warmth, not even with concern, but with something else. Assessment, calculation, like he was trying to decide how much resistance I would offer and how far he could push. "You've been different lately," he said finally. I met his gaze. "How so?" "Second-guessing things," he replied. "Forgetting conversations. Getting stuck on details." I let a small pause stretch between us, then said softly, "I don't think I'm the one stuck on details." His jaw tightened. "Mom," he said, his voice lowering slightly, "I'm trying to help you." I held his gaze. "And I'm trying to understand you," I said. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not guilt, not exactly, but something close to being seen. Then it disappeared. "You're overthinking this," he said, stepping back. "Maybe. But I wasn't the one under pressure." Not anymore. That evening, Denise came by again. This time, she didn't bring anything. She just sat with me. We didn't speak right away. Sometimes silence says more than conversation ever could. Finally, she turned to me. "What did Patricia say?" she asked. I told her. Everything. Michael's debts, the potential legal trouble, the urgency behind his actions. Denise listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail. "So this isn't just about control," she said. "It's about survival for him." "Yes," I replied. She leaned back slightly, crossing her arms. "That makes him more dangerous," she said. I nodded. "I know, because desperation changes people. It sharpens them, pushes them further than they might otherwise go, and Michael was already moving fast." "Do you think he'll stop?" Denise asked. "No," I said, because now I understood something clearly. Michael had already crossed the line, not just once, but repeatedly, and people don't step back from that kind of line easily. They double down. They push harder. They justify. They convince themselves they're right. "He's going to escalate," Denise said quietly. "Yes," I replied. "And when he does," she added, "he'll slip." I looked at her. "That's what we're waiting for," I said. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because everything was too clear now. The doctor's visit, the paperwork, the comments to neighbors, the financial pressure, the legal positioning. It all fit together. Every piece, every step. And the more I saw it, the more one truth stood out above everything else. Michael didn't think of this as betrayal. He thought of it as necessity, a solution, a way to fix his life, even if it meant quietly taking mine apart. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts steady. Because once you understand someone's motivation, you can predict their next move. And I knew exactly what Michael would do next. He would push for something official, something structured, something that involved other people, doctors, family, maybe even legal representatives, a setting where his version of events could be stated clearly, formally, where I could be framed not as someone resisting, but as someone declining. And when that moment came, he would expect me to react, to get emotional, to defend myself in a way that made me look unstable. But I wouldn't, because I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. And when the time came, I wouldn't just have my memory. I would have the truth, and the one thing he had already given me without realizing it. Proof, When you know a storm is coming, the air feels different. Not louder, not darker, just heavier, like everything is holding its breath. That's how the house felt in the days after Patricia's call. Michael didn't stop. If anything, he became more deliberate, more careful, which in its own way told me everything I needed to know, because people who believe they're right don't become more cautious. They become more confident. Michael was cautious, which meant he knew somewhere beneath all his justification that what he was doing couldn't withstand too much light. It started with the phone calls. I was in the kitchen one afternoon when I heard his voice from the living room, soft, measured, concerned. "Yes," he said, pacing slowly. "It's been getting worse." "No, she doesn't always realize it herself. I just want to make sure she's safe." I didn't need to see who he was speaking to. I already knew. Family, neighbors, anyone whose opinion might matter later. I stepped into the doorway quietly. He turned slightly, not noticing me at first. "I'm doing everything I can," he continued, "but I can't be here every second." That was new. That shift from present helper to overwhelmed caretaker. I stepped fully into the room. "Michael." He turned quickly, ending the call almost immediately. "Hey," he said. "Didn't see you there." I gathered I replied. He slipped his phone into his pocket. "Just checking in with Emily," he said casually. "She's been asking about you. Emily Brooks, my niece. Sweet, kind, and trusting." "Is she worried?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "A little," he said. "I told her not to be, but you know how people are." Yes, I did, especially when they're given a story to believe. That evening, Emily called me directly. Her voice was gentle, but there was something underneath it now. Something new. Concern, shaped by someone else's words. "Aunt Lorraine," she said. "How are you?" "I'm well," I replied. "How are you, sweetheart?" "I'm good," she said quickly. "I just wanted to check on you." I smiled faintly, even though she couldn't see it. "I appreciate that." There was a pause. Then she said carefully, "Michael mentioned you've been having a few difficult days." There it was again. Not accusation, not confrontation, just a seed, planted gently. "I've had a few busy days," I said. "Nothing difficult." Another pause. "Then okay," she said softly. But I could hear it. The uncertainty, the doubt. Not in me, but in what she had been told. We spoke for a few more minutes about small things, familiar things, but the tone had shifted. And when we hung up, I sat there for a moment staring at the phone, because this was exactly what Patricia had warned me about. Isolation. Not by removing me from people, but by changing how they saw me. The next escalation came faster. Michael approached me the following morning with a new tone entirely. More official, more structured. "I scheduled another appointment," he said. I looked up. "With Dr. Keller?" "Yes," he replied. "He wants to follow up, go over a few things, maybe run a more detailed evaluation." Of course he did. "And when is this?" I asked. "Friday," he said. 2:00. I nodded slowly. "And what exactly is the purpose?" I asked. Michael shifted slightly. "Just to get clarity," he said. "Make sure we're not missing anything. Always we." I held his gaze. "I'm not confused, Michael," I said. "I know you think that," he replied gently. That tone, that careful, practiced empathy that carried something else beneath it. "Dismissal. I'll go," I said. His shoulders relaxed slightly. "Good," he replied. "That's the right decision. The right decision," as if the choice had already been made. Later that day, I called Patricia. "He's moving forward," I told her. "Another doctor's appointment. A more formal evaluation." She didn't sound surprised. "I expected as much," she said. "So what now?" I asked. "Now we let him continue," she replied. "But we prepare the environment, meaning we create a setting where he has to speak clearly," she said, "where his statements are documented, where inconsistencies matter." "A meeting," I said. "Yes," she confirmed. "A case conference." The words settled into place. Not a confrontation, a structure. Something that would feel official, controlled, difficult to manipulate. "He'll agree to it?" I asked. "If it's framed as support for you," she said yes. "Of course. Everything was framed that way." "Who would be there?" I asked. "Michael," she said. "Possibly Dr. Keller or a representative." "Myself." "And you?" I nodded slowly. "And Denise?" I asked. "As a supporting witness," Patricia said. "If needed." That felt right. "Good," I said. There was a brief pause. Then Patricia added more quietly, "Lorraine, when that moment comes, you need to stay exactly as you've been." "Calm," I said. "Yes," she replied. "Precise. Let him speak first. Let him commit to his version of events." And then I asked, "Then we respond with facts," she said. "Facts. Not emotion, not accusation. Truth." That night I sat in the living room while Michael moved through the house. I could feel the shift in him now, the confidence returning. Because in his mind, everything was aligning. The doctor, the family concern, the subtle signs he believed I was showing. He thought the narrative was solid, that it would hold, and that belief made him just a little less careful. Just enough. "You doing okay?" he asked, pausing in the doorway. I looked up at him. "I'm fine," I said. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Good," he replied. "We'll get everything sorted soon." Everything. Sorted. The words lingered after he walked away, because to him, that meant control, resolution, closure. But not for me. For me, it meant something else entirely. It meant the moment was coming, the one Patricia had been preparing for, the one I had been waiting for, a setting where Michael would have to speak clearly, where his careful phrasing wouldn't be enough, where the small details he had overlooked would matter. I leaned back in my chair, my hands resting calmly in my lap, because for the first time since this began, I wasn't wondering what he would do next. I already knew. He would walk into that room believing he was in control, believing he had built something strong enough to hold, and in that belief, he would make the final mistake. Not a loud one, not a dramatic one, just enough, just precise enough, to let the truth do what it always does, reveal itself. The day of the meeting arrived with a stillness that felt almost deliberate. No wind, no noise. Just that same quiet weight pressing against everything, like the world itself was waiting to see which version of the story would survive. Michael drove us to the office. He insisted on it. "I'll handle everything," he said as he picked up the car keys that morning. "It's easier this way." Easier. For him, perhaps. I didn't argue, not because I agreed, but because this was part of it. Let him feel in control. Let him believe he was guiding the outcome. The drive was mostly silent. Michael kept both hands on the wheel, his posture steady, his focus forward. If anyone else had seen him, they would have thought he was simply a devoted son taking care of his mother. And that was the problem. Because that image, the calm, responsible caretaker, was exactly what he had been building. Carefully, patiently, layer by layer. The meeting was held in a conference room at Patricia's office. Neutral space, professional, controlled. When we walked in, Patricia was already there, seated at the far end of the table. A folder sat in front of her, neatly arranged. To her right sat Dr. Keller. He gave me a polite nod as we entered. "Mrs. Hayes," he said. "Good to see you again." "Doctor," I replied. Michael guided me to a chair, pulling it out slightly as I sat. A small gesture, thoughtful, visible. Everything about him was visible now. Every move, every word designed to reinforce the role he had chosen. Patricia waited until we were all seated before speaking. "Thank you for coming," she said. "The purpose of this meeting is to review concerns, clarify information, and ensure that any decisions moving forward are based on accurate understanding. Clear, direct, no room for interpretation." Michael nodded immediately. "Of course," he said. "That's all I want." I didn't respond. I simply folded my hands in my lap and waited, because this was his moment. Patricia turned slightly toward him. "Michael," she said, "since you initiated many of these concerns, why don't you begin?" He didn't hesitate. That more than anything told me how confident he felt. "I've been noticing changes in my mom over the past few weeks." He began, his voice steady, measured. Nothing extreme at first, just small things. Misplacing important documents, forgetting conversations, repeating herself. He spoke calmly, clearly, without emotion, like he had rehearsed it. "I moved back in to help," he continued. "At first I thought it was just stress or normal aging, but then it started happening more often." Dr. Keller nodded slightly, making a note. "And how frequently would you say these incidents occur?" he asked. Michael paused just briefly. "A few times a week," he said. "Sometimes daily, depending on the situation." I watched him carefully. The confidence, the certainty, the way he filled in details without hesitation. He believed this, or at least, he believed he could make others believe it. Patricia spoke again. "Can you give a specific example?" she asked. "Sure," Michael said. "A few days ago, she couldn't find her bank folder. It ended up in the kitchen pantry." He glanced at me just for a second. "I didn't put it there," he added gently. "But she didn't remember moving it." I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because that moment, that exact moment, would matter later. He continued. "She's also been getting confused about dates, asking the same questions more than once, forgetting whether she's taken her medication. Each statement was delivered with the same calm tone. Each one sounded reasonable, plausible, and that was the danger, because lies wrapped in reason are harder to challenge." Dr. Keller leaned forward slightly. "And Mrs. Hayes," he said, turning to me, "how do you feel about what your son is describing?" The room shifted, just slightly. This was the point where I was expected to react, to defend, to push back, to show something, anything that could be interpreted as instability, but I didn't. Instead, I took a breath and answered simply, "I feel that he's describing a version of me that doesn't match my reality," I said. My voice was calm, even, measured. Michael's jaw tightened just slightly. Patricia nodded. "Can you elaborate?" she asked. I turned my attention to her. "Yes," I said. "I'd like to address the documents." There was a pause, a small one, but noticeable. Michael shifted in his seat. What documents, he asked, his tone still controlled. Patricia reached forward and opened the folder in front of her. "These," she said, sliding copies across the table. The papers landed softly, but the impact was immediate. I watched Michael's eyes flick down, then back up. For a moment, something flickered there. Recognition, followed quickly by control. "These are preliminary drafts," he said. "Nothing finalized." Patricia didn't respond to that. Instead, she asked, "Can you explain your signature placement on page 2? There it was. Not loud, not dramatic, just precise." Michael looked at the page, then back at Patricia. "I signed where it was indicated," he said. "No," Patricia replied calmly. "You didn't." Silence. Heavy now, measured. I leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, just enough. And then, for the first time since the meeting began, I spoke with intention. "I'd like to explain what happened," I said. No one interrupted. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told the truth. "The document was presented to me in my dining room." I began. Late afternoon. The light was coming in from the side window. Michael's eyes flicked toward me. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. "You placed the papers in front of me," I continued. "You said they were routine, that they would make things easier later." My voice remained steady, every word deliberate. "I read them," I said, carefully, "because that's what I've always done." Dr. Keller stopped writing. Listening now. Really listening. There was a page I continued that didn't match the others. It referenced authority over property decisions. Patricia nodded slightly. "You became impatient," I said. "You told me I was overthinking it." Michael shifted again, his breathing slightly uneven now. And then I said, finally looking directly at him, "You signed your name." The room held its breath. "Not at the bottom," I added. "Not where you were supposed to, but on a line above it." I let that settle. "I remember the pen," I said. "Blue ink. Your hand angled slightly to the left. The page slightly out of alignment." No one spoke. No one moved. Because this wasn't emotion. This wasn't confusion. This was precision. And that same signature I finished quietly is now on the document you submitted. The silence that followed was different, not uncertain, not tense. Certain, because something had shifted. Not in me, but in the room. Michael opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time. He didn't have an immediate answer. And that was the beginning of the end. Silence has a way of revealing more than words ever can. After I finished speaking, no one rushed to fill it. Not Patricia, not Dr. Keller, and for the first time since this began, not Michael. He sat there, his hands resting on the table, his posture still but not relaxed. His eyes flicked briefly to the documents in front of him, then back up again as if searching for a version of events that could still hold together under what had just been said. But there wasn't one. Not anymore. Patricia was the first to move. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward or shift dramatically. She simply adjusted the top page in front of her and spoke with the same calm precision she had carried throughout the meeting. "Michael," she said, "in addition to your signature placement, There are other inconsistencies we need to address." He looked at her, his expression tightening. "What inconsistencies?" he asked. Patricia turned another page and slid it slightly closer to him. "The timing of submission," she said. "These documents were brought to Lorraine's home but never finalized. Yet a version of them appears in our office shortly afterward attached to a preliminary inquiry." "They're drafts," Michael said quickly. "I told you that." "Yes," Patricia replied evenly. "But drafts are not typically submitted with signatures, especially not when those signatures appear in positions that suggest acknowledgement or authority beyond what has been explained." Michael's jaw flexed. "I was trying to get information," he said. "That's all." Denise, who had remained quietly seated to my left, shifted slightly but didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone mattered. Patricia continued. "We also have a record of your call to this office prior to Lorraine's visit," she said. "In that call, you expressed concern about her cognitive state and asked about potential updates to her legal authority structure." Michael exhaled sharply. "Because I'm concerned," he said. "Is that a crime?" "No," Patricia replied. "Concern is not a crime." A brief pause. "But misrepresenting circumstances in order to establish legal control can be." The air in the room changed. Not suddenly, but definitively. Michael leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You're twisting this," he said. "No," Patricia replied. "I'm clarifying it." Dr. Keller cleared his throat softly. "I'd like to address something from a medical standpoint," he said. All eyes shifted to him. He looked at Michael first. "During our initial appointment, he said much of the context regarding Lorraine's condition was provided by you." Michael nodded. "I was giving you what I've observed," he said. "Yes," Dr. Keller replied, "but clinical assessment relies not just on observation, but on consistency, direct evaluation, and corroboration." He turned to me. "Mrs. Hayes demonstrated no significant cognitive impairment during that visit," he said. "Her responses were accurate, timely, and appropriate." Michael shifted in his seat again. "That's how it starts," he said quickly. "It's subtle." Dr. Keller didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. "What concerns me now," he continued, "is the discrepancy between what was reported and what is being demonstrated here today." He gestured lightly toward me. "Mrs. Hayes has just provided a detailed, consistent, and verifiable account of a specific event," he said, "one that aligns with the physical evidence we've reviewed." Another silence. Heavier this time. Because this wasn't about opinions anymore, it was about alignment. Between memory and proof. Michael's composure began to crack, not dramatically, not visibly to someone who wasn't looking closely. But I was looking closely. His shoulders were tighter, his breathing shallower, his responses just slightly delayed. And then he spoke again. "I'm trying to protect her," he said, his voice sharper now. "That's all this is." Patricia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she allowed the words to settle. Then she asked, "Protect her from what?" Michael hesitated. "Just for a moment." "From making mistakes," he said finally, "such as Patricia asked. Financial decisions," he replied. "Legal issues. Things she might not fully understand anymore." I watched him carefully. Because this was it. The shift. From careful concern to justification. "She's always handled her finances," Patricia said calmly, "with no record of mismanagement." "That doesn't mean it can't change," Michael snapped. There it was. The edge. The first real crack in the tone he had maintained so carefully. Denise leaned forward slightly. "And what exactly has she done that makes you think that's happening?" she asked. Michael turned toward her, irritation flashing across his face. "You're not involved in this," he said. "I'm involved enough to notice patterns," Denise replied evenly. Michael's composure slipped another fraction. "This isn't about patterns," he said. "This is about reality." "And whose reality is that?" I asked quietly. The room stilled. He looked at me. Really looked at me. And for the first time, there was no softness in his expression, no patience, no careful concern, just something raw, frustration, and beneath it, something else. "I've been dealing with this alone," he said, "trying to keep everything together." "No one asked you to do that," I replied. "You needed it," he said. "I didn't," I said. He shook his head, a short, sharp motion. "You don't see it," he said. "That's the problem." "No," I said quietly, "that's your problem." The words landed harder than anything that had been said so far, because they weren't emotional. They were clear. Michael's hands pressed flat against the table. "You have no idea what I've been dealing with," he said. And there it was, the shift Patricia had predicted, the moment when justification turns inward, when the truth begins to surface not as confession but as complaint. "Then explain it," she said calmly. Michael looked at her, then at me, then back at the table. For a moment it seemed like he might pull himself back, reconstruct the careful version of events he had been presenting. But something had already broken. I lost everything he said finally. The business, the money, everything. No one interrupted. "I had people coming after me," he continued. "Bills I couldn't pay, legal threats. And I come back here, and what do I see?" His eyes lifted again, directly at me. A house, he said, paid off, stable, secure. The room went still, completely. "You think I wasn't going to try to protect that?" he asked. "Protect?" The word sounded different now, stripped of its softness, revealed for what it was. Protect it for who Patricia asked. Michael didn't answer immediately, but he didn't need to, because it was already clear for himself. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he said, his voice quieter now. "I was trying to make sure something didn't fall apart again." I held his gaze. "And the only way you could do that," I said slowly, "was by making it look like I already had." He didn't respond, because there was no response left. No explanation that could untangle what had just been said. No version of events that still held. The truth had come out, not in one dramatic confession, but in a single bitter sentence. And that was all it took. There is a moment after the truth is spoken out loud when everything becomes very quiet. Not because the situation is resolved, but because there is nothing left to hide behind. No more careful words, no more softened explanations. Just the reality of what has been done, sitting in the open where everyone can see it. That's where we were now. Michael's last sentence still hung in the air, heavy and unmoving. "I wasn't trying to hurt you." He had said it like it meant something, like intention could undo impact, like damage didn't count if it came wrapped in justification. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Patricia closed the folder in front of her. The sound was soft, final. "Michael," she said calmly, "what you've described confirms a pattern of behavior that raises serious legal concerns." He looked at her sharply. "I didn't do anything illegal," he said. "You attempted to establish authority using incomplete and misleading documentation," she replied. "You introduced those documents under false pretenses. and you began building a narrative of incapacity that is not supported by clinical evidence. That's your interpretation, he said. No, she said evenly. That is the documentation. Another silence. Different this time. Not uncertain. Decisive. Dr. Keller leaned forward slightly. I also need to clarify my position, he said. Michael turned toward him. Based on what I've observed today, the doctor continued, there is no clinical basis to conclude that Mrs. Hayes lacks the capacity to manage her own affairs. The words landed clean, clear, unmistakable. Michael didn't respond, because there was nothing left to argue. Denise shifted beside me, her presence steady and grounded. Patricia continued, effective immediately, all attempts to modify Lorraine's legal or financial authority without her direct verified consent will be blocked, she said. Additionally, I will be documenting this sequence of events in her file. Michael's hands tightened slightly on the table. So what he said? His voice lower now. You're just going to shut me out. This is not about shutting you out, Patricia replied. This is about restoring appropriate boundaries. Boundaries, a word that should have been simple. But in that moment, it carried everything. I finally spoke. Michael, I said. He looked at me, and for the first time since the meeting began, I didn't see strategy in his expression, or control, just something unsettled. You didn't ask me for help, I said quietly. He didn't answer. You didn't tell me what you were dealing with, I continued. You didn't trust me with the truth. I didn't want to worry you, he said. That's not why I replied. He flinched just slightly. Then why he asked? I held his gaze. Because asking would have meant accepting whatever answer I gave, I said, and that wasn't enough for you. The room went still again. Because we both knew it was true. He hadn't wanted help. He had wanted control. I was trying to fix things, he said, quieter now. At my expense, I replied. He looked away. And that was answer enough. The meeting ended shortly after that. Not with raised voices, not with dramatic exits, but with something far more final. Clarity. Patricia gathered the documents. Dr. Keller stood offering a brief professional nod. Denise placed a steady hand on my arm. And Michael. Michael walked out without saying another word. The drive home was silent. I didn't go with him. Denise drove me instead. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Some moments don't require commentary. They just need space to settle. When we pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a second longer than necessary, looking at the house. The same house Michael had seen as an answer to his problems. The same house I had spent a lifetime protecting. Do you want me to come in? Denise asked gently. I shook my head. No, I said. I'm okay. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. I'm right next door if you need anything, she said. I know, I replied. I stepped out of the car and walked up to the front door. The key felt heavier in my hand than usual, not because it had changed, but because I had. Michael was already inside, standing in the living room, waiting. He turned as I entered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he took a step forward. So that's it? He asked. I set my purse down slowly. What do you mean? I said. You're just going to let them paint me like that, he said. Like I was trying to take something from you. I looked at him, really looked, not at the version of him I remembered, but at the man standing in front of me now. You were, I said. His expression hardened. I was trying to keep things from falling apart, he said. No, I replied. You were trying to make sure you had control over what happened when they did. He shook his head. You don't understand what I've been dealing with, he said. You're right, I said. That stopped him. I continued. Because you never told me. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. You made a choice, I said. Not once. Not by accident, but over and over again. His hands clenched at his sides. So what happens now? He asked. I took a breath. This was the moment. Not the meeting, not the evidence. This. The decision. You don't have access to my accounts anymore, I said. His eyes flashed. You already did that, yes. You didn't even talk to me first, I tried. I said, you weren't interested in talking, you were interested in control. He let out a sharp breath. And the house, he asked. The locks will be changed tomorrow, I said. The words landed between us like something solid, unmovable. You're serious, he said. I've never been more serious, I replied. For a moment something flickered across his face. Anger, then disbelief, and finally, something quieter. You're throwing me out, he said. I'm setting a boundary, I replied. It's the same thing. No, I said. It's not. Another silence, then softer now. You're my mother, he said. And there it was, the last card, the one he hadn't used yet. Not control, not logic, emotion. I felt it. Of course I did. That connection doesn't disappear just because it's been damaged, but it changes. It has to. Yes, I said quietly. I am. He waited. For something else. For softness. For forgiveness. For a way back in, but I didn't give it to him. Not then. Not like that. And because I'm your mother, I continued, I should have been the one you came to, not the one you tried to work around. His shoulders dropped slightly, the fight leaving him in pieces. I didn't think you'd understand, he said. I might not have, I replied, but I would have listened. That landed differently, because it wasn't accusation, it was truth. And truth, when it's quiet, has a way of cutting deeper than anything else. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded, once, slowly. Okay, he said. No argument, no push, just acceptance. Not complete, not peaceful, but real. He turned and walked toward the hallway. I didn't stop him. Because this part wasn't about winning, it was about drawing a line. And for the first time since all of this began, that line was clear. The morning after Michael left the house felt different. Not quieter. It had always been quiet. But lighter. As if something that didn't belong had finally been removed, and the walls, old as they were, could settle back into themselves again. I stood in the kitchen with my coffee, the same place I had stood every morning for years, and for the first time in a long while. Nothing felt uncertain. Not my memory. Not my choices. Not my place in my own life. That alone was enough to make me close my eyes for a moment and simply breathe. Denise came by early. She didn't knock this time. She just stepped inside like she always had. Well, she asked, leaning against the doorway. He's gone, I said. She studied me for a second. Are you okay? She asked. I nodded. Yes, I said. I think I am. She smiled faintly. I think you are too. We didn't say much more than that. We didn't need to. Some victories aren't loud. They're quiet, steady things that settle in slowly. Patricia handled the rest with the same precision she always had. Within days, everything was secured. My accounts were locked down under updated verification. Any prior authorizations Michael had access to were revoked. My will and medical directives were reviewed and reinforced with additional safeguards, clear, specific language that made it impossible for anyone to step in without undeniable proof of necessity. Not assumption, not suggestion, proof. And most importantly, everything required more than one layer of verification. No single person would ever have that kind of control again. Not because I expected another betrayal, but because I understood now how easily trust can be misused when it isn't protected. Michael called once, 3 days after he left. I didn't answer, not because I didn't care, but because I needed time to understand what caring looked like now. Later that evening, he left a voicemail. "I'm figuring things out," he said. "I didn't realize how far I'd gone until everything came out." There was a pause. Then softer, "I'm sorry." I listened to it twice, not for the words, but for what was behind them. Regret. Yes, but also distance, because apologies don't rebuild trust. They acknowledge that it's gone. I didn't call him back. Not yet. Some things can't be rushed. A week later, Emily came by. This time, she didn't carry hesitation in her voice or uncertainty in her eyes. She knocked, waited, and when I opened the door, she hugged me tight, genuine, without doubt. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have come to you first." I placed a hand on her back. "It's all right," I said. "No," she replied, pulling back. "It's not. I let someone else tell me who you were instead of listening to you." I looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "That happens more often than people realize," I said. She stepped inside, glancing around the house. "It feels different here," she said. "It is," I replied. We sat together in the living room talking not about what had happened in detail, but about what it meant. About how easily perception can be shaped. About how dangerous it is when concern becomes control. About how quickly people are willing to question someone's clarity, if the right story is told. Emily listened, really listened. And when she left, I knew something important had shifted. Not just for me, but for her too. Life didn't return to what it had been before. It couldn't, because I wasn't the same person I had been. I was still Lorraine Hayes, still organized, still precise, still aware. But now, I was something else too. I was someone who had seen how easily a life can be rewritten by someone else, if you're not paying attention. And more importantly, I was someone who had refused to let that happen. A month later, Denise convinced me to attend a small community meeting at the local center. "Just come listen," she said. "That's all." It turned out to be a group focused on financial awareness for older adults. Not dramatic, not emotional, just practical discussions about protecting yourself, recognizing warning signs, understanding your rights. I sat in the back at first, quiet, observing, until someone at the front asked a simple question. Has anyone here ever felt like someone was making decisions for them without their full understanding? The room shifted. A few hands went up, hesitant, uncertain. And before I realized it, mine did too. When they asked if I wanted to share, I hesitated. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because saying it out loud would make it real in a different way. Still, I stood. "My name is Lorraine Hayes," I said, "and for the first time, I told my story. Not all of it, not every detail, but enough. Enough for people to understand. Enough for them to recognize something in their own lives. Enough for the silence in that room to feel less isolating. When I finished, no one clapped. No one spoke immediately. But I saw it in their faces. Recognition, understanding, relief. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone else know they're not imagining what they're experiencing. That night I sat in my living room again, the same lamp casting the same soft light across the same walls. But everything felt different. Not because something had been taken, but because something had been protected. I thought about Michael, not with anger, not even with disappointment, but with something more complicated. He had made choices, clear ones, deliberate ones, and those choices had consequences for both of us. I still loved him. That didn't change. But love was no longer enough to give him access to my life without limits. Some people think strength looks like holding on no matter what, but sometimes it looks like letting go of what you hoped someone would be and accepting who they've shown themselves to be. As I turned off the light and prepared for bed, one final thought settled into place. Clear, simple, unshakable. Michael thought this was a story about memory, about what I could or couldn't recall. But he was wrong. This was never about forgetting. It was about remembering details, remembering patterns, remembering the truth. Even when someone else tries to rewrite it. And most importantly, remembering myself. There's a quiet truth many people don't talk about enough. As we get older, the world doesn't always take us at our word anymore. People begin to question small things. They start to listen to others instead of listening to us. And sometimes that shift doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people closest to us. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about awareness. Because control doesn't always look like force. Sometimes it looks like concern. Sometimes it sounds gentle. And sometimes it builds slowly, one small comment, one small doubt at a time, until suddenly your voice feels smaller in your own life. That's why details matter. That's why paying attention matters. And that's why trusting yourself matters more than ever. Lorraine didn't fight by shouting. She didn't win by overpowering anyone. She stood her ground by staying calm, by observing, and by holding on to the truth when someone else tried to reshape it. And that's something we can all learn from. Because protecting your dignity is not cruelty. Setting boundaries is not betrayal. And choosing to see things clearly is not weakness. It's strength. So I want to ask you, have you ever experienced a situation where someone used concern as a way to control or influence you? How did you handle it? And if you haven't, what would you do if you were in Lorraine's position? I'd truly love to hear your thoughts, too. Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And if this story resonated with you in any way, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because stories like this, they matter.